the same exact time that Margaret Garner and her family tried for their freedom, John, a friend named Frank, and his cousin Dinah also made the journey from Maysville. They go through Ripley. John and Frank stick together. Dinah splits off from the men, and they proceed to go north through Ohio. They end up at Lake Erie, but it's not crossable. The weather isn't suitable for boat crossing. So what they end up doing is they backtrack here to Oberlin. They heard it might be safer here for a bit of time, and so they decide to wait for the spring thaw, and then they're going to cross into Canada. And we'll see some of these monuments a little bit up close here. But we're going to, are they on the bus? No, okay. So we're going to talk here for a moment, and then we'll get off the bus. So what ends up happening is that John and Frank, they're living on a farm. They are taking work as they can. They're making lives here. They ended up living here for 2.5 years. So they don't continue with that spring thaw. They decide to stay here. And they probably would have stayed here longer, but unfortunately a bounty hunter has come to Oberlin. His name is Anderson Jennings. He is the former neighbor of their enslaver in Maysville. He's looking specifically for John and Frank. But this bounty hunter, he knows of Oberlin's reputation. So what Oberlin has been doing for a number of years at this point to get around the fugitive slave laws is that a lot of people participate more passively in this network. And what I mean by that is, yes, they were openly helping people in this community. Oberlin itself was treated as the station. People knew if they got here, they could find assistance. But what they knew was that if they did things in a certain way that would not hold up in a court of law, they'd be a little bit safer. So what that looked like was like a don't ask, don't tell situation. So, there's an existing African American community here because of that 1835 decision. By the 1850s, with the college opening its doors in 1835, up until that point, you have a lot of free black families moving here for educational opportunities for themselves and for their children. 20% of Oberlin is black at that point. And this is a physically integrated community. And what I mean by that, the church was integrated. The college, all facilities were integrated. The town was integrated. The downtown, the neighborhoods were by and large integrated in this community pre-Civil War. But socially, there was still segregation happening here. We've talked about this idea a few times on the trip. You could be an abolitionist, you can offer some opportunities, but there's a spectrum of equality, a spectrum of beliefs of equality. So you could be on the side of full integration, full equality. You could be on another side where maybe saying, I don't agree with slavery, but I don't want to be integrated. Okay, thank you. So what ends up happening is the community employs this kind of don't ask, don't tell policy. So if somebody is new to the community, they don't say, hey, are you a freedom seeker? Because again, that's not going to hold in a court of law. The other thing that people do can be a little bit more dangerous, and actually quite dangerous. Some of those free black citizens of Oberlin, they would act as vigilance communities. They would also act as decoys. They would exchange clothing with freedom seekers and try to be a distraction to slave catchers and bounty hunters coming through here. Had they been caught, now, laws were not on their side, right? And especially during those years of the black laws, they would have very little legal representation. So this was dangerous activity, even at best circumstances, if they had been caught. At worst circumstances, what happens if they were kidnapped and taken? So those were just some of the various ways generally that people from Oberlin would participate in this network. But basically, Anderson Jennings knew that there have been several bounty hunters that had come to this area. None of them were successful. We've also heard the phrase killing them with kindness. That's another thing that Oberlinians would employ. They would follow these bounty hunters around town, and they would take shifts watching over them, and they would go up to them and say, hey, how are you doing? Where are you staying? Where are you going? Who are you looking for? How can I help you? And basically annoy those people until they would leave town. It was said one slave catcher was witnessed marching south out of town, exclaiming, "Don't these confounded Oberlinians ever sleep?" So back to the Oberlin Wellington rescue. Anderson Jennings, he's staying at a tavern on the southern edge of town. It's owned by a man named Chauncey Wack. Chauncey Wack would come to live in this white house right here. Wack was a bit whack. He's the villain of this story. He basically stands for a lot of things that Oberlinians have stood up against. So, Ken, I don't know if you really mentioned too much of this, or I might have missed it. Oberlin was a very religious place that observed very strict lifestyle. So, again, with the Graham diet, we heard about that, but no alcohol, no tobacco, no stimulants, that means no caffeine, no spices, as Ken mentioned. So you can find those things at the Wack Tavern. And that's where a lot of outsiders like to stay when they came through. They felt more comfortable there. So Wack puts Jennings in contact with other people like Wack who were pro-slavery living in this community. Not everybody here was an abolitionist. And so some of those individuals come together, they work with the marshals, they come up with a plan, they pay this young child to go up to John Price and say, "Hey, we have work on my father's farm, we need your help today." With no witnesses, John follows the child to the outskirts of town, and the slave catchers ride up, they capture John, and they started heading south to a town called Wellington, where they're going to board a train and be out of this area as quickly as possible. Their plan works. But fortunately, on their way to Wellington, there were also some students who were traveling the path. They recognized the danger that John was in. They sounded the alarm once they got back here in this community, and then hundreds of people, they started going south to Wellington to free John Price. Now what ends up happening is that hundreds of people surround the hotel that the slave catchers have John, that they're going to take him from to the train depot, and then they surrounded that. They demanded to have him freed. They even offered to pay for his freedom, but the bounty hunter was having none of it. So they break into the hotel, and they're able to help free John Price. So some of the men who were at that rescue included men like Wilson Bruce Evans, who would come to live in this brick house here.